I have been doing so much army painting for Warhammer 40,000, and army painting is not speed painting, it's good painting quickly. But I'm a little burnt on painting the same guy over and over and over again, trying to go as fast as I possibly can. I'm in the mood for a nice palette cleanser, a lovely little mini that I can pour some love and attention in and do a really good job on. Something nice, something small. I'm thinking a giant robot. I've been procrastinating on my Infinity. I really like these models, but I feel like they call for a cut above paint job, and it's tough for me to find the time to give these models what they deserve. This is a mental roadblock I put on myself. It's not really true. It does take a bit longer to do more painting, but it's not that much more, and it helps to work on one guy at a time. Infinity is chock full of beautiful minis, and the easiest way to get into them is with the Essentials pack, a little skirmish between the Pano and the JSA with dice and terrain. And if any of you guys want to jump into Infinity, stay tuned on how you can get a copy for free. This guy is the Oyori Kitabutai, a big old tag, tactical armored gear. And unlike a lot of Infinity miniatures, this guy is made of injected thermoplastic, which is not my favorite material, but this figure being huge, the slight bendiness of the material does help a lot, keeping this mini light and strong. And this box comes with the little remotes, the crazy koalas, and they're in lovely metal, which is the perfect material for these tiny detailed minis. Now to get these parts clean, I threw them into my crazy overkill ultrasonic cleaner. A minute under the faucet with a rubbing of a toothbrush would also work, but as long as I have it, I like to use it, and I feel like I can notice the difference between clean and ultrasonically clean. I dried all the guys and then got to work cleaning up the parts. For the thermoplastic parts, I clipped the sprue nibs as flush as I could and then used my hobby knife and sanding twigs to file down the edges to perfection. After that, I started gluing the parts together. This thermoplastic needs to be glued together with super glue. I attached the arms, and to anyone building this mini, I would highly suggest gluing on the little pilot arms first. It was really hard to put them in place after the big robot arms. Now for the big old gun, it has this little tube that goes into his back, and it doesn't have a great connection point, so I decided to drill and pin this with some 1mm brass rod. This will help me keep the parts separate for painting. I test fitted this and then threw this stuff onto some paint handles. Now with that big old tag prepped, I quickly cleaned up the crazy koalas, and these guys are in lovely metal, so they were nice and easy to clean. I've got my Oyori and my crazy koalas all built and ready for their bases, and I like to go pretty hard on my Infinity bases. For my Pano guys, I have them in an alien purpley environment, and for my JSA, the Japanese Successionist Army, I like to put them on urban bases, which are hard to make, but I got some time, I can do it. These crazy koalas are metal, so they need a strong connection. Luckily, the sculpts have these little metal tags under their feet, so I can use these as pins. I just have to build the bases. I started out adding some 1/8" cork to build up a little height. I like to have my JSA on a cyberpunk street corner. To make the asphalt, I smeared out some putty to smooth over the cork, and for the gutters, I grabbed the leftover trim I made for my last batch of JSA. This is a decoration I made out of sandpaper. I have to make a little bit more of this, so I marked out an 1/8" grid on the edge of some 220 grit sandpaper, and I cut out the shapes like gears of teeth. This adds some techno-greebling to my street corner. I glued this onto my base with some super glue, and to add some more texture, I cut out a little strip of plastic to build up the height. I took some 1mm brass rod and glued down a few lengths of these, and then I have this corrugated styrene sheet, and I glued this down on the other side for my street. I roughly cut this out with my nippers and then got it perfect with my Dremel tool. Now I can glue down my koalas, and one important thing about Infinity bases is that they have facing markers. And I have before built whole bases and glued models on backwards. I had to cut off the markers and then rebuild these the right way forward. I cut the metal peg of my crazy koalas, sanded it round, and then drilled a matching hole into the base and inserted my little fellows with lots of super glue to lock them down. These not so furry friends aren't going anywhere. Now for the Oyori base. I built these in exactly the same way as before, but I feel like the street could use some more interest, so after the corrugated styrene, I used some more thin styrene to build up a little grid and glued this on top. Where the columns met the rows, I put down a little bit more plastic putty so I could sand it smooth to perfection. After that, I decided to lay down some road lines, and I thought of a saucy way to do this. I took some painter's tape and laid this down so I had 2 skinny lines, and then I globbed on some more plastic putty, smeared this over the tape, and while it was still wet, I peeled it away, leaving me with 2 perfect lines. I got my guys all ready for painting, and one little problem that I run into with Infinity is the models are really good, and so I want them to be perfect, and that usually means that I spend way too long painting them. But I think if I leverage my tools and my tricks, I can get these guys looking pretty spicy in not that long. We'll see. The Oyori has got white armor, and white is typically a really hard color to paint, but I have some new ideas on how to tackle this. After getting him and his boys stuck onto some paint handles, I primed them in black, and typically I would lay down a white color with a zenithal, but I have a new strategy. I started out mixing a dark blue and a dark gray and base coated everything. This will give me nice cold shadows. Now I can lay down some white paint with the zenithal, but I'm not just blasting it from above. I went in slow, letting it build up through gray to only pure white in a few spots. I don't want to have to paint any white. I want the airbrush to do it all for me. Now I have my white color down, I actually want to darken it a little bit. And to do that, I made up a dark blue transparent color using Leviathan blue, which is a good match for my original dark blue-gray base coat. I sprayed this everywhere, which subtly knocked down the brightness of my white. This is important for later, but while I have this blue color, I grabbed a liner brush with a nice long bristles and started a recessed shade, dripping this paint into the cracks and lines of the armor to darken them. I like to do this with contrast and speed paint so that it flows off the brush into the cracks, and if I mess up, it has a long enough work time that I can quickly come back in with a clean brush and wick away any mistakes. Now for the juice. Different models like to be painted different ways, and this guy is basically a Gundam. He's all about his armor panels, and I want to paint him to highlight these, so edge highlights will be the perfect thing. That layer of dark blue I sprayed knocked my white airbrush layer from pure white to a light gray, and so now when I lay down edge highlights of pure white, they will be the brightest white on the model. I went over every bit of them, edge highlighting every piece of armor, and it frames the lovely gradients the airbrush gave me beautifully. While I was working on these colors, I hit the koalas too. Look at these big goofy eyes. With the white done, I grabbed some black speed paint and hit the in-between parts of his armor, his robo tushy and any other robo skin showing through. And now, like 80% of the model is done. Now it's just the decorations, and chief among them, the red accents. I want his shoulders and thigh armors red. I started out doing a base coat of a dark red, and to work in some shadows, I grabbed a speed paint. This will work similarly to the dark blue-gray I did on the body panels, dripping this into the cracks of his armor, and in some places I did a few layers to get the red even darker. Now I can start working on brightening, going into the bright saturated red and doing some thick edge highlights and painting the face of each armor panel. And now I have achieved full red. But I want to go further. On my palette I mixed red and white and fluorescent orange. This will be my brightest highlight, and hopefully that fluorescence will give me some extra punch. I need to use this sparingly though, because if I go too much, the red will become orange, but I want these red parts to really stand out proudly, just like the white armor. Given the model a look-see, I feel like the sword is also calling for some red, on the eelskin wraps of his sword. I did all the same steps to get these parts really shining. I've got the red and the white done on my tag, and he is rapidly coming together. The next step is his weapon. Other than his giant samurai sword in his arm, he's got the humble heavy machine gun heavy flamethrower. This piece dominates the figure, and I really like how the airbrushing with the edge highlights worked on his body, and so I want to see if I can get away with something very similar on the gun. This gun has the same dark blue-gray base coat, which will work perfectly. I just want to edit it just a little bit, hitting it with a light gray from above and a black from below to get as much contrast as I can while keeping it nice and dark. This worked out nicely, and now I can lay down some edge highlights. Instead of white, I used a light gray, the same light gray I airbrushed on, and I picked out the shapes of his gun. And once I had those highlighted, I mixed in just a little bit of white paint and reapplied some highlights, hitting the edges facing up so that they're a little bit brighter. Now for the brass parts of the gun. I base coated these with an orangey brown, and then I shaded these with a watery coat of dark brown. Then for the highlights, I mixed some yellow with my orangey brown and started sketching in some reflections. I want this guy special, so I'm going non-metallic metal on these parts. Like the armor, the airbrush did a lot of the work, and I carefully painted the shoulders, so on the gun, the airbrush did the base coats and I can spend my time on these canisters. I mixed up more and more bright yellow, leaving behind less and less paint to make these reflections glisten. These brassy accents are really shiny, and I feel like the body of the gun is still a little dull, so I used some white paint to do some final edge highlights and just a few spots to brighten up the gun. While I was in the mood for non-metallic metal, I threw this brassy color combo over the details of his sword, and for his fuel canister, I put some contrast black over the hose. I sketched on some vertical lines to add a little bit more detail. I glued on this sucker, and now to attach the gun, it slipped right into place, and because of my brass rod pin, I got the hose attached no problem. Now the only thing that is standing out to me is the sword sheath is looking a little bland. I hit the tip with a few puffs of white from my airbrush and edge highlighted the shaft with white. Then I grabbed a saturated blue speed paint and globbed this on. Why is the sheath blue? Because it's cool. While I have this blue, I threw it into his armholes. Why not? I bet these little bits glow blue. And now for his head. I've learned my way around the model so I can take the tools I have and put them onto his little peanut head. Saturated red for his noggin, and for the unicorn horn, some brassy brass. I glued it into position and my tag is done. My Oyoroi is done, and I was right, he was pretty quick to paint. I mean, it took a solid day, but it was a really fun day because I pretty much let the airbrush take care of most of my colors and values. The only stuff I really spent time on is the red parts of his armor and the non-metallic gold on his guns. And that stuff was really fun to paint. And speaking of fun, now it is time for the crazy koalas. If you had to guess what the crazy koalas do in game, what would that be? If you said, keep an eye out for enemies, you'd be right. And what do they do once they've spotted those enemies? They run after them, and if they get the chance, they explode in glorious firework spectacle and also probably very gruesomely. I love these silly little guys, and it is now time to get them finished. Infinity is fun because it kind of gives you everything you want. Giant anime robots? Check. The cutest little robots you've ever seen? Check. I hit the ears and nosies of these koalas with some black speed paint, and I highlighted these with some leftover gray from my palette, working up to edge highlights of light gray. Now to add some red accents. I picked out the chest and their chubby little arms with red base coat, using my speed paint to darken them, and then my fluorescent red mix to highlight. I did a little bit of edge highlighting with white paint to bring out the details, but honestly the airbrush did a pretty good job for most of these guys, and I didn't even touch their legs. I freehanded a little box with shapes onto their foreheads matching the box art. I'm sure these mean something. It's not their sectorial symbol. The sectorial I'm gonna run for my JSA is Oban. Now for the glowy bits. I grabbed some neon green contrast paint and glazed this over their eyeballs and around the rim of the eye sockets to make these spots look glowy. And I turned the model over and they have these little windows on their back. I suppose this is the power plant that explodes, so I hit these windows with some white paint and a dry brushing of white to help sell the glow. Then another glazing of green. And you know what else could use a green glaze? EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly train packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This April, we're going hard into skirmish fantasy warfare with 3 themes. The mythical forest, a set of fantastical trees held aloft by otherworldly levitating stones and waterfalls with the power of life. The eternal graveyard, a desolate shrine to the forces of death, macabre headstones piled against the last remnants of a long-forgotten cemetery, and the cannibal camp, a ramshackle encampment where the marauders can divide up their spoils and cook up their victims. These sets are designed with storytelling in mind, and are the right size and shape for all the popular fantasy games. You can match the theme of your army, keeping your beloved collection looking good while dominating the battlefield. These sets are available on our website as STLs, and don't worry if you don't have a 3D printer, they are available physically, printed for you. These crazy koalas are a unit type in Infinity called a remote. And a remote is something unique to Infinity. I don't know what it means, but I think it stands for the cutest widow guys. These often come with different Infinity units, and they're a really nice little painting palette cleanser. Just a cute little something. Now that I got my cute little somethings and my tag all done, it is time to make my custom bases look as good as these Infinity models. One thing I want to play around with is treating these bases like their own non-metallic metal project. On one koala, I went with a dark spot in the middle with brightness all around. And I base coated this with the same colors I used for my non-metallic metal brass, focusing on the yellow and brown over the orange, and I did a lot of wet blending. This is really nice on something that's flat. It's really easy to reach everything and I can work fast before the paint has had time to dry. On the road, I used some light blue-gray from my gun to wet blend onto the road, and for the sidewalk, I made up a magenta out of the red and white and glazed this over the corrugated plastic. Having the colors on the base match the colors in the mini gives a nice unified look that'll help my JSI army stand out against my other Infinity collections. For the big old tag base, I used my airbrush to spray on some spots of white to give me some nice targets on how to lay down my colors, so I get a good amount of variety in the lighting. I really like how it all turned out, and I'll have to keep track of these colors for the rest of my JSA force. I want to go heavy into robots and mechs. I finally glued down my big mech, and now it's time to finish up these fellas. For the rim of the base, I used my airbrush to spray on black to keep it perfect, and for the facing markers, I hit these with some white paint to prime them so that my red paint will stand out proudly. I also mixed a little bit of my fluorescent orange into the red to give me a little extra pop. Now to seal in the flavor, I dusted these minis with some Vallejo satin mecha varnish, which is super appropriate for these mecha dudes, and my minis are ready to join my growing Infinity collection. And speaking of growing the collection, if any of you guys want to grow or start an Infinity collection, we're giving away a copy of Infinity Essentials. Leave a comment telling me what I should name my crazy koalas, and in the description, there's a form, and if you fill that out, you'll be in the running to win this Infinity starter set. One more box of Infinity under my belt. I got my Oyoroi all done and the crazy koalas. I'm kind of approaching my JSA, my Japanese Successionist army, a little different than my Pano forces. For my Pano forces, I'm very responsibly building up from the base, working on all of my basic troopers first, and then I'll get into the more exotic things. Where with the JSA, I'm kind of eating dessert first. These guys are awesome. I've got the Oyuroi, I've got my crazy koalas, I've got my, oh my goodness, what are you called? Daikai, and the Karakuri special project robots that have been on my painting desk for far too long. I just gotta get these finished up. But I am doing some really good work on my Infinity, and in the very near future, I'll be able to get some games in. I think the next unit that I'm gonna get for my Infinity collection is gonna be Yojimbo, which is a mercenary for the JSA. And that unit comes with 2 more crazy koalas, so I'll have quite the crazy koala collection. The Oyori Kitabutai is one of the reasons why I started collecting Infinity. I like the tags. I like the big old fellas. The little guys are cool too, but if I can have giant robots, I'm gonna get giant robots. I'm gonna go look for more giant robots to get. Thanks for watching.